Before I tell you how I walked into the nursing home with nothing and left owning it, I need you to understand what nothing really feels like. It isn't just the absence of money or a home. It's the silence after loss, the kind that hums in your bones. It's when you pack a single suitcase not because you're traveling, but because everything else has already left you. That was me 3 years ago, standing on a cracked sidewalk with my mother's ashes in a box and a letter from the landlord that said, in polite words, "You have until Friday." I had cared for her until the end. Through the coughing, the forgetting, the kind of dying that happens in small pieces before it's official. And when it was finally over, the world didn't clap or cry. It just carried on. I remember thinking, how cruelly easy it is for life to continue without the person who held yours together. The only job I could find was at a nursing home called Evergreen Hills. The name sounded peaceful, but the building looked tired even from a distance. 3 stories of faded brick and rusting railings. The ad had said, "Live-in caregiver, immediate start." I had no references, no savings, no options, so I took it. The first thing I noticed when I arrived wasn't the smell of disinfectant or the flickering lights. It was the air. It didn't move. It sat heavy, like it had been waiting too long for someone to open a window. The receptionist looked up from her phone long enough to ask for my name. "Clara Ward," I said, trying to make it sound confident. She pointed me toward a hallway without a smile. End of the corridor. "Staff office. Talk to Ms. Jenkins." Ms. Jenkins was a woman who looked like she had given up on softness decades ago. Her gray hair was cut sharp, her shoes clicked with every step, and her eyes missed nothing. "You've done care work before?" she asked, flipping through a file that was definitely empty. "I took care of my mother," I said. "That's not professional experience." "It's the only kind I have," she sighed. "You'll start in room 12. Mrs. Brooks, 92. Rich, difficult. Thinks this place is a hotel she forgot to check out of. You'll learn." I nodded, pretending I wasn't terrified. That first night, the home felt like a ship drifting in fog. The sound of wheelchairs squeaking, the distant hum of televisions, the occasional cry of someone calling a name that didn't belong to the living. I carried my small suitcase up the stairs, past portraits of smiling elderly couples that must have been hung decades ago, when optimism was still part of the decor. My room was barely more than a box. Single bed, metal wardrobe, a lamp with a shade that leaned like it was tired too. I unpacked slowly. One folded sweater, a notebook, the urn with my mother's ashes. I placed it on the windowsill. "We made it somewhere, Mom," I whispered. "It's not home, but it's something." The next morning I met Mrs. Adeline Brooks. She was sitting by her window in room 12, wearing a silk scarf that had no right to look that elegant in a place like this. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, her eyes sharp as frost. "So you're the new one," she said. "The last girl left after 2 weeks. Said she preferred the company of the sane." I smiled nervously. "I'll try to last longer." She studied me for a long moment. "Do you lie often?" "Only when I'm scared," I said before I could stop myself. Her lips twitched. "Then we'll get along just fine." That was the first time anyone here had made me laugh. Days at Evergreen blurred together, a routine built on repetition and resignation. Breakfast at 7, medications at 9, bathing schedules, laundry lists, call lights that never stopped ringing. The other caregivers were efficient but distant, their faces set in expressions that said, "Don't get attached." I tried to keep up. Some nights, when the halls went quiet, I would walk past the residence doors and listen, not in intrusion but in reverence. Some whispered prayers, some cried names into their pillows, some snored softly, the rhythm of surrender. It felt like walking through a hallway of forgotten lives, each one flickering faintly, waiting for someone to remember they had existed. Mrs. Brooks was different. She didn't wait for anyone. She ruled her room like a queen whose kingdom had been reduced to 4 walls. She'd correct me when I fluffed her pillows wrong, criticize the way I folded her scarves, and once accused me of stealing her pearls, which turned out to be in her bedside drawer all along. But beneath her sharp tongue was something else. Alertness. Life. She asked questions no one else did. "What are you running from, Clara?" she asked one afternoon as I replaced the flowers on her nightstand. "I'm not running," I said. She smiled like she didn't believe me. "Everyone here is. The difference is whether they stop before they die." Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window for hours, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You miss someone," I said once softly. Her gaze didn't move. "At my age, dear, I miss everyone." One evening, as I walked her to dinner, a man in a suit I'd never seen before stopped me in the hallway. "Mrs. Brooks, your children send their love," he said with the kind of politeness that costs money. Adeline's jaw tightened. "Tell my children they wouldn't recognize love if it signed their checks." The man left quickly, embarrassed. I didn't understand then, but I remembered it later. The way she'd looked after him, equal parts fury and grief. At dinner, she barely ate. "Do you have children?" she asked me suddenly. I shook my head. "No." "Good. They break your heart. Then sell the pieces." I didn't know what to say, so I reached for her hand. And to my surprise, she didn't pull away. Weeks passed. The work was hard. The pay was small. But somehow the days stopped feeling endless. The residents began to recognize me. Mr. Langley, who thought he was still a teacher, called me Miss Ward, the assistant. Mrs. Ramirez, who never spoke to anyone, started humming when I entered the room. Evergreen was still falling apart, flickering lights, broken elevators, food that tasted like cardboard. But within its walls, tiny moments of life glowed. Then one night, everything changed. I was on the night shift, making rounds, when I noticed Mrs. Brooks's door slightly ajar. Inside, the light was on, and she was awake, writing something by hand. Real paper. Real ink. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She looked up. "I'm not old enough to waste time sleeping." "What are you writing?" "A letter," she said. "For someone who doesn't know she's important yet." I smiled, thinking it was another one of her riddles. But when I turned to leave, she said quietly, "You remind me of myself," before I forgot who that was. I didn't sleep that night either. A week later, Ms. Jenkins called a staff meeting. She said 2 residents' families had complained about missing valuables. A ring, a watch. Her eyes lingered on me longer than on anyone else. After the meeting, she pulled me aside. "You've been spending a lot of time with Mrs. Brooks. She asks for me. She asks for trouble," Jenkins said coldly. "Be careful. That woman has ruined more people than time itself." Her words stuck to me like static. That evening, when I brought Mrs. Brooks her tea, she saw the worry in my face. "What did Jenkins say?" I hesitated. "That you ruin people." Mrs. Brooks laughed. A dry, elegant laugh. "Then I'm still doing something right." Then more softly, "Don't listen to people who've traded compassion for compliance. They hate mirrors." She handed me an envelope. "Lock this in your drawer, will you? Somewhere safe. What is it?" "Nothing for now. Something, eventually." I took it, uneasy, but obeyed. A few nights later, I found her crying. It startled me. She was the kind of woman who would rather bite her lip than let it tremble. "Are you in pain?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered, "but not the kind the pills can touch." She looked at me, tears glistening on her lined cheeks. "I built this place, Clara. Did you know that?" I blinked. "Evergreen Hills?" She nodded. 50 years ago, my husband and I. It was supposed to be a place of dignity, of music, laughter, gardens. Now look at it. They sold it, gutted it, turned it into a business where people come to disappear." I didn't know what to say. She reached for my hand. "Promise me something." "Anything." When I'm gone, don't let them bury what's left of me here. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in elegant script, not addressed to me but signed with her name, Adeline Brooks. It read simply, "To the one who still remembers what care means, I trust you to see what others refuse to look at. No instructions, no explanation. Just that." I folded it back carefully, placed it under my pillow, and lay awake listening to the rain tapping against the window. I had walked into Evergreen Hills with nothing, but something told me I had just been handed the beginning of everything. When you spend enough time in a place like Evergreen Hills, the line between living and waiting begins to blur. Every hallway feels like a memory. Every face becomes a mirror for something you've lost. But Mrs. Brooks, Adeline, refused to wait. She moved through those corridors like a storm trapped in fine china. And somehow, she made me want to keep pace with her. The morning after she gave me that letter, I arrived early to help her dress. She was already awake, sitting by the window in her robe, her scarf perfectly tied. "You're late," she said, though I wasn't. "The sun's been up for hours. Time doesn't wait for those who think they're humble." I smiled. "I'll be faster tomorrow." "You won't," she said, sipping her tea. "But at least you're honest about it." That was our rhythm. Her sharp edges meeting my cautious patience. Every conversation felt like a chess match, except I didn't know the rules and she pretended she didn't either. But beneath her sarcasm, there was kindness, precise and deliberate, the way an artist hides color in shadow. By my second month at Evergreen, I knew everyone by name, though not all of them knew theirs anymore. Mr. Langley, who still believed he was teaching history at the university, would greet me each morning with, "Miss Ward, the lecture on the French Revolution starts at 9. I always told him I'd bring my notes. Mrs. Ramirez hummed hymns to herself while knitting scarves that no one would wear. She never spoke, but she smiled when I did. The staff barely noticed me. To them, I was just another temporary caregiver who'd vanish after a few paychecks. But I wasn't planning to leave. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Ms. Jenkins continued to run the place with an iron mouth and a heart of steel. She cared about schedules, not souls. "You spend too much time with her," she warned one day, meaning Adeline. "She's manipulative." "She's lonely," I said. "So are we all," Jenkins snapped. "And we still do our jobs." Her words stung, but I didn't answer. People who stop believing in kindness see it as weakness. I couldn't hate her for that. I just didn't want to become her. Adeline's health began to waver that spring. She had good days, when her wit was sharper than any scalpel, and bad ones, when her breath came in shallow waves and her memory slipped through her like water. On the bad days, I sat by her bed and read to her from the old books she kept stacked beside the nightstand. Her favorite was a collection of letters by Virginia Woolf. "Women like her," she said once, "didn't write for approval. They wrote because silence is a disease." She'd often fall asleep mid-sentence, her fingers resting on the page as if to hold her place in time. On those nights, I'd cover her gently and stay a while, listening to the wind move through the vents. I used to think care work was about doing, but with her, I learned it was about being present, being still, being witness to someone else's fight against disappearing. Then came the day that would change everything. It started quietly, the way most earthquakes do. I was refilling her water when two men in suits walked in without knocking. Their confidence filled the room before their words did. "Mrs. Brooks," one said, smiling like he'd practiced in the mirror. "I'm pleased to inform you that the quarterly reports for the facility have been finalized. You'll be happy to know profits are up 12%. She didn't look at him. "I don't recall asking about profits," he laughed lightly. "Just keeping you informed, ma'am." "You're keeping me irritated," she said. "Who are you?" The other man spoke. "I'm Alan West, the director of Evergreen Hills." I frowned. The director? I'd never seen him before. Ms. Jenkins always referred to management, like it was some faceless god that lived upstairs. Adeline leaned back in her chair. Director? She repeated. That's a generous title for a thief. Alan's smile faltered. I beg your pardon? You should, she said, eyes like glass. You've been stealing from these people, overcharging families, cutting corners on medication, falsifying expenses. I built this place. I know the smell of rot when it starts. He turned red. That's absurd, is it? She said. Then why does the food budget shrink while your car gets shinier? The room went still. I froze, unsure whether to speak. Alan cleared his throat, plastered his smile back on, and said, Let's not upset ourselves, Mrs. Brooks. We'll have Ms. Jenkins check your vitals. Good day. When they left, I turned to her, heart racing. Is that true? You built this place? She looked out the window. Once, before my children sold it out from under me. Your children? She nodded. They called it restructuring. I called it betrayal. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her teacup. I thought I was giving them something solid to inherit. A legacy. A home for people no one else would care for. But greed eats faster than hunger, Clara. That's what they never teach you? I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but she closed her eyes, weary. Not tonight, she whispered. Some truths need oxygen. This place doesn't have enough. The next few weeks became a study in tension. Staff whispered when I entered rooms. Jenkins avoided my gaze. Alan West began visiting more often, always leaving with files tucked under his arm. Something was happening behind those doors. Something the residents didn't deserve to be part of. Then, one night, Mrs. Ramirez's son came to visit and stormed out 15 minutes later, shouting that his mother's savings account had been emptied. The next morning, he filed a complaint with the state. 2 days later, the paperwork went missing. Jenkins said it must have been misplaced. The same week, Mr. Langley fell out of bed and wasn't found for an hour because the night shift had been cut for budget reasons. I tried to raise it with Jenkins. This isn't right, I said. People are getting hurt. She gave me that look of someone who'd traded conscience for comfort a long time ago. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a caregiver, not a crusader. I'm human, I said. So are they. She laughed, bitter and short. Then you'll fit right in when this place eats you alive. That night, I went to Adeline's room after my shift. She was sitting in her chair again, awake. You saw it, didn't you? She said without turning. Yes, I whispered. I saw everything. Good. Then you understand why I chose you. I frowned. Chose me? She looked at me with those piercing gray eyes. You think it was chance that brought you here? That ad wasn't posted by the home. I paid to have it placed. I stared at her. You what? I've been looking for someone like you for months. Someone who hasn't yet learned how to stop caring. My mind spun. Why me? Because you came here with nothing, she said. And people with nothing are the only ones who know what everything is worth. I sat down slowly. What do you want from me? Not from you, she corrected. For you. I want you to help me take back what's mine, before they bury me under my own name. I didn't know what to say. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air charged. How? She smiled faintly. By doing what they don't expect. By paying attention. Watch. Listen. There's a key in my dresser. Use it when the time comes. What time? You'll know, she said. But when it comes, don't hesitate. For the next week, I moved through Evergreen like a ghost with open eyes. I watched files being moved, medicines being logged incorrectly, deliveries arriving and disappearing before being signed for. I started writing everything down. Dates, names, numbers. Each detail felt like a stitch, threading together a picture I didn't yet understand. One night, I caught Jenkins in the storage room, counting bottles of morphine. When she saw me, her face went pale. Out, she said. Now. But the next morning she was all smiles again. Careful where you wander, Clara. Curiosity kills more than cats. I went straight to Adeline's room. They're stealing medications, I whispered. Selling them. That's why the pharmacy deliveries are off. She nodded. Of course they are. You knew. I suspected, she said. But suspicion without evidence is gossip. And gossip won't save anyone. I showed her my notebook. Then we'll get evidence. For the first time since I'd met her, she smiled without sarcasm. Good girl. That night I unlocked her dresser. Inside was a small ornate box. It held photographs of her with a man I assumed was her husband, standing before Evergreen's gates when the paint was still new. Behind them, the sign read, Evergreen Hills Care and Grace Home, founded 1971. There were also old letters, contracts, and a copy of a deed with her name on it. She really did build it, I murmured. Underneath the papers was something else. A sealed envelope addressed to the attorney of Brooks and Associates. I held it up. What's this? Her voice was weak but steady. Proof of ownership and of theft. My hands trembled. Why give it to me? Because, she said softly, they'd never believe someone like you could own something like this. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. The storm was coming. I could feel it. The kind that didn't just tear through sky, but through the lies people live inside of. And in that moment, I understood what she'd meant that first day. Kindness was expensive here, but courage was priceless, and I was done paying with silence. You learn to read silence differently when you live in a place built on it. At Evergreen Hills, silence was never peace. It was camouflage. It hid what people didn't want you to see, what they were afraid someone like me might uncover. By the time spring gave way to summer, I could feel the tension crawling under the walls like ivy. Voices lowering when I entered. Keys jingling behind closed doors. Paperwork vanishing overnight. I kept pretending not to notice. But Mrs. Brooks, Adeline, she always noticed. Secrets have a sound, she told me one morning as I poured her tea. They hum. If you're quiet long enough, you can tell who's keeping them. I laughed softly. You make it sound like the walls are alive. They are, she said, eyes narrowing. And they remember everything. That week, the air in the nursing home changed. The director, Alan West, started visiting almost daily, always arriving in his polished black car, always leaving with more papers than he brought. Jenkins became jumpier, checking the front desk phone every few minutes. The residents, as usual, were the last to know. I started noticing bruises, not on bodies, but on routines. Meals arriving late, laundry unwashed, medications delayed. When I asked about it, Jenkins snapped, budget cuts. Be grateful you still have hours. But the ledger I'd seen on her desk, the one she'd forgotten to close, told another story. The numbers didn't add up. That night, I wrote everything down in my little notebook. Dates, invoices, signatures. My hand shook as I did it. I wasn't brave. I was scared. But fear can be useful if you don't let it own you. When I told Adeline the next morning, she nodded, as if she'd been waiting for me to reach this point. Good, she said. You're finally seeing the rot. Now we can decide whether to treat it or burn it out. Burn it? I echoed. She smirked. Metaphorically, dear. Though I wouldn't cry if it caught fire. A few nights later, I stayed late after my shift. I told Jenkins I was finishing inventory, but really I was following Alan West. He left his office around 9, walking fast, carrying a leather folder. I kept a distance, heart pounding. He stopped near the back exit, met a man I didn't recognize. Tall, wearing a delivery uniform, and handed him the folder. The man gave him a small package in return. They didn't see me. The next morning, a new shipment arrived, labeled medical supplies, though the boxes were far too light. When I told Adeline, she closed her eyes. "Morphine," she whispered. "They're selling it. That's how they pay for their new cars and their vacations." Her voice trembled with rage. "They've turned my sanctuary into a marketplace for misery." I stared at her. "How do you know?" "Because I once hired men just like them," she said bitterly. "People who pretended to care about care. I thought money could buy kindness. I was wrong. The more I learned, the more impossible it became to unsee. I started copying files when no one was looking. Expense reports, patient records, bank statements. I hid them in a shoebox under my bed. Jenkins must have sensed something, because she began keeping me away from the office, reassigning me to double shifts in the dementia ward. "I need you to focus on the living." "Clara," she said one morning, voice like a blade. "Not the ghosts." But every time I looked at the residents, I saw ghosts already, walking, breathing, fading. People who deserved more than the mechanical care they were being given. One night, as I was helping Mr. Langley back to bed, he gripped my wrist and whispered, "They come at night." "Who does?" I asked, startled. He shook his head, eyes wide. "The men with flashlights. They take things. They think I'm asleep, but I see them." It took me a second to realize he wasn't confused. His room was near the supply hall. The next night, I waited in the shadows after midnight. And he was right. 2 orderlies I didn't recognize wheeled out boxes, labeled biohazard waste, and loaded them onto a van. I took pictures with my phone, my hands trembling. One of them looked back suddenly, and I ducked behind a cart, heart hammering. When I told Adeline the next day, she said, "You've done enough watching. Now you act." "How?" "Call my lawyer," she said. "The number's in the back of my jewelry box. His name is Michael Parks." I found it, dialed the number from the staff office during lunch. The man who answered sounded older, calm. "Mrs. Brooks's attorney," he said. "My name's Clara. I work at Evergreen Hills. She said to call you." Silence, then a soft exhale. "It's about time," he said. "She told me you'd find me." He met me that evening in the visitor's garden, a kind-eyed man in his 60s wearing a beige coat. "I've represented Mrs. Brooks for 40 years, he said. "I thought she'd given up." "She hasn't," I said. "But she's sick, and this place, they're stealing from her, from everyone." He nodded. "I know. Her children sold the property under false pretenses. They left her with stock that's worthless on paper but priceless in guilt. She wanted to fight, but they made her sign power of attorney documents while she was in the hospital." I felt sick. "So she doesn't even own her name here?" "She does," he said, his eyes kind. "She just needs someone to claim it." "What does that mean?" "You'll see," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "She asked me to give this to you when you were ready." Inside the envelope was a copy of Evergreen's original deed, with Adeline's name as sole proprietor, and a handwritten note. "To the one who remembers what care means, there will come a day when this building forgets its purpose. When that happens, remind it who it belongs to. I trust you, not because you're perfect, but because you still notice the difference between kindness and performance. That's what I lost, before I lost everything else." I sat there holding the paper, realizing what she was asking me to do. This wasn't about exposing corruption anymore. It was about resurrection. The next day, Alan West announced a routine inspection. Staff scrambled to make everything look spotless. They replaced linens, repainted peeling walls, even wheeled in fake plants. The residents didn't understand why there was such sudden enthusiasm. "It's all for show," Jenkins whispered. "You'd better smile." But when the inspectors arrived, I noticed one of them talking quietly with Alan, laughing. Their handshake lingered too long. By then I knew what to do. I slipped the photographs, the ledger copies, and Adeline's note into an envelope and mailed it to Michael Parks. That night, I didn't sleep. 2 mornings later, everything exploded. State investigators showed up unannounced. Alan's face turned the color of wet paper. Jenkins tried to intercept them, but they brushed past. They searched the supply room, the office, the archives. Within hours, they found evidence of narcotic diversion, forged records, and embezzled patient funds. Allen was arrested on sight. Jenkins tried to claim ignorance, but the files I'd sent included her signatures. The news spread like fire. For the first time in years, the halls buzzed with something other than despair. Disbelief, vindication, hope. I ran to Adeline's room. She was sitting by the window, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "You did it," I whispered. She shook her head slowly. "No, we did. I just lit the match. You let it burn." I knelt beside her. "They'll fix this place now. They'll make it right." She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen before. "Don't wait for them to fix it. Build it yourself," I frowned. "What do you mean?" She took my hand. "You'll understand soon." Her skin was thin as paper, but her grip was strong. "Promise me, Clara. Don't let them turn this home into another business again." "I promise," she nodded, eyes glistening. "Good. Then it's yours to save." That night, I found her gone. She passed in her sleep, peacefully, they said, like a candle burning out when dawn arrives. Her bed was neat, her scarf folded on the chair. On her table sat a single envelope, with my name written in her elegant handwriting. Inside was a key and a note to Clara. "You came here with nothing, but you gave me back everything I'd lost. The deed is with Mr. Parks. The future is with you. Do not let either be wasted." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried until my body couldn't anymore. In the hallway, the night nurse hummed softly, unaware of the history that had just shifted. The walls seemed to breathe, lighter somehow, and for the first time, Evergreen didn't smell like goodbye. It smelled like beginning. After Adeline's death, Evergreen Hills felt different. The air was still thick with the smell of disinfectant. But there was something else now. Something invisible, yet undeniable. Like the silence after a thunderstorm. The kind that hums with change. For days I walked the halls in a daze, half expecting to see her sitting in her chair, scarf perfectly tied, ready with another sharp remark. But the room was empty now, stripped of her presence. And somehow that emptiness was louder than any sound. I tried to keep busy. There were residents to feed, linens to wash, lives that kept moving because they had no choice. The world doesn't stop when a great woman dies. It just gets quieter for those who noticed. Her funeral was small. Only me, Michael Parks, and a few residents who were well enough to attend. Her children didn't come. I stood there in the rain holding an umbrella over her casket, feeling like I was witnessing the burial of something much bigger than a person. Something sacred. Legacy, maybe. After the service, Michael handed me another envelope. "She left this with instructions," he said. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter in Adeline's unmistakable handwriting, and a second document sealed with an attorney's stamp. The letter read, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the world has once again mistaken silence for peace. Don't make the same mistake, Clara. The papers enclose transfer ownership of Evergreen Hills back to me. Or rather, to the only person I trust to restore what it was meant to be. You. I know you didn't ask for this. I didn't either when I built it the first time. But sometimes we're chosen by the very things we try to escape. Take it, fix it, and when they come for you, because they will, don't be afraid. You've already faced worse." I stood there under the gray sky, tears mixing with rain. She'd left me the home, and she was right. They came for me. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Allen West and Ms. Jenkins were charged with fraud, negligence, and the unlawful distribution of controlled substances. But they weren't going down quietly. They blamed me. Their lawyers claimed I'd manipulated Mrs. Brooks, that I'd coerced her into changing her will while she was mentally compromised. Suddenly, I wasn't just the caregiver. I was the alleged con artist. Reporters came to the gates of Evergreen. Headlines read, "Young nurse involved in scandal of elderly heiress." They printed my photograph. A stolen one from my social media where I was smiling with my mother. They made that smile look guilty. The residents didn't know what to believe. Some whispered when I passed. Others held my hand and said, "We know who you are." Still, it hurt. I almost quit. Packed my suitcase one night, the same one I'd carried when I first arrived. But when I looked around my small room, I saw the key Adeline had left me, hanging from a nail near the window. I thought of her voice. "Don't let them bury what's left of me here." And I realized, walking away now would be burying her all over again. The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom smelled of old paper and arrogance. Alan sat across from me, calm and polished, the kind of man who believed he could buy innocence. Jenkins avoided my eyes, her posture a perfect imitation of shame without the substance of it. When I took the stand, their lawyer smiled like a man who'd already won. "Ms. Ward," he said, "how long had you known Mrs. Brooks before she decided to rewrite her will?" "6 months," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "And in those 6 months she made you her heir? You don't find that unusual?" "She didn't make me anything," I said. "She trusted me to protect what she built." He leaned closer. "Or to steal it." The judge interrupted. "Counsel, restrain your assumptions." I could feel my hands shaking under the table. My throat was dry, but then I remembered Adeline's words. "Kindness is expensive here. Be careful how much you give." So I gave them honesty. I told the court everything. The falsified records, the missing medication, the late-night deliveries. I gave them copies of every document I'd hidden, every photo I'd taken. And when I described the moment Adeline died, I didn't cry. I just said, "She died believing this place could be good again." When I stepped down from the stand, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. Michael Parks presented the rest. The deed, the financial statements, the police reports. Piece by piece, truth replaced rumor. And in the end, the truth won. Alan West was sentenced to prison. Jenkins made a deal to testify against him and was banned from ever working in elder care again. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, like standing on ashes after the fire goes out. When I returned to Evergreen, it was quiet. The staff was gone. The doors locked for investigation. I walked through the empty halls, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. The smell of bleach was sharp, almost cruel. Then I reached room 12. The window was open, letting in sunlight that hadn't touched those walls in years. Dust motes floated in the air like slow-moving stars. Her chair was still there, her scarf folded neatly on the armrest. I sat down in it and whispered, "I did it, Adeline." The room didn't answer. But something inside me did. A month later, I got a letter from the state. Evergreen Hills was to be sold to pay restitution and rebuild under new management, unless someone bought it privately. Michael called that night. "She left you a trust," he said. "It's not much, but combined with donations, it could be enough to make an offer." I didn't hesitate. People thought I was crazy. "Why would you want that cursed building?" A friend asked because it wasn't cursed. It was misunderstood, and because I'd promised her. The sale went through quietly. On a cold October morning, the keys were handed to me. The papers said my name now. Clara Ward, owner. When I walked through the front doors, the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence anymore. It was potential. The walls were worn, but I could see what she saw once. Laughter in the halls, sunlight in the windows, dignity instead of despair. It wouldn't be easy. The roof leaked. The wiring was ancient. Half the building was condemned. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of hard things. I hired new staff. People who cared more about hearts than schedules. We repainted the rooms, replaced the fluorescent lights with warm lamps, planted a small garden outside, the kind Adeline used to talk about. Every morning I'd walk through those halls with my coffee, greeting residents by name. And every time someone smiled at me, really smiled, I'd think, this is what she wanted. But the peace didn't last. One winter night, the fire alarms went off. I ran down the hall, barefoot, heart hammering. Smoke poured from the kitchen. An electrical spark from the old wiring. Flames licked up the wall fast. I shouted for everyone to evacuate. The nurses rushed the residents into the courtyard, blankets over their shoulders. I went back in twice, once for the emergency medications, once for the photographs on the wall. The heat was unbearable, but I couldn't leave them behind. Those faces, the memories, the proof that this place had been home. When I finally stumbled out coughing, the firefighters were there. The roof collapsed minutes later. The building was saved mostly, but half of it was gone. And for a moment I thought, maybe this is a sign to give up. Maybe the fire is the end. But then I remembered something Adeline once said. Fire doesn't only destroy, it reveals what can't burn. And I realized she'd been right again. In the weeks after the fire, volunteers from the town came to help rebuild. Former staff returned. Families donated supplies. Even some of the residents' children, the same ones who had ignored them for years, came to paint and clean. And when I stood there, surrounded by all of them, I understood the truth. Evergreen wasn't mine because of a piece of paper. It was mine because I refused to stop believing in what it could be. The trial, the fire, the whispers. All of it had led here, not to ownership, but to belonging. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone surviving inside a world I didn't deserve. I felt like someone rebuilding it. It's strange how time softens everything, even the things you swore you'd never recover from. It's been 3 years since the fire, 3 years since I stood barefoot in the snow, watching flames rise through the roof of the only place that ever felt like home. That night I thought it was over, that all of Adeline's dreams had burned with the walls she built. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what she had been trying to teach me all along, that some things must be broken to reveal their purpose. Evergreen Hills reopened last spring. We dropped the hills. It felt too polished, too detached. Now the sign outside reads simply, Evergreen Home. The new paint gleams white against the morning light, framed by vines that have begun to grow again along the brick. The garden in the back, once dry and forgotten, now hums with life. Roses, lavender, and the same daisies Adeline once loved. When I walk through the halls now, I still see the past, the corners that smelled of fear, the rooms that held too much silence. But I also see the future. Laughter echoing down the corridors, music drifting from the community room, residents sitting by the window without waiting for permission to exist. The place feels alive again, not perfect but breathing, and so am I. I kept Adeline's chair, the same one from room 12. It sits in the main hallway now, beside a framed photograph of her and her husband, in front of the original evergreen. Beneath it, a small brass plaque reads, For the woman who built a home where others found themselves again. Sometimes I catch new residents resting there, their hands brushing the worn arms of that chair, unaware of its story. It makes me smile. She would have liked that. Not being worshipped, but quietly remembered. I talk to her sometimes, not out loud, just in that small space inside where grief turns into gratitude. I tell her about the new nurse who hums while she works, about Mr. Langley, who finally stopped giving imaginary lectures and now helps run our book club, about Mrs. Ramirez, who hums the same hymn every morning as she waters the plants. I tell her I've kept her promise, that no one here disappears anymore. We started something called the Evergreen Program, an internship that trains young caregivers who've lost their way, just like I once did. They come here for 3 months, learn what care really means, not just changing sheets and counting pills, but listening, really listening, to people who feel invisible. The first girl who came through was 19, quiet, nervous, haunted by something she wouldn't talk about. She reminded me of myself the day I arrived here with one suitcase and too many regrets. On her last day, she hugged me and said, "I didn't think I was good at anything until I came here." And I smiled, because that's what Evergreen was supposed to be. Not a place where people come to end their stories, but where they learn. There's still something left to write. Sometimes when I walk through the garden at dusk, I can still smell the faint trace of smoke from that old fire, mixed with lavender and rain. It doesn't frighten me anymore. It reminds me fire takes, but it also clears. And that's what Evergreen became. A place cleared of greed, rebuilt on something purer. Michael Park still visits once a month. We sit in the garden and talk about Adeline, about the early days, about how strange it is that I ended up here. The girl who came with nothing, now sitting on the board of her own home. He always brings coffee. "She'd be proud of you," he says every time. I never quite know how to answer. Pride feels too small for what I carry. What I feel isn't pride. It's peace. The kind that comes when you stop running from your past and start walking with it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I saw a moving truck pull up at the gate. A woman stepped out, late 40s, holding the hand of her father, a frail man with trembling fingers. They both looked lost. I met them halfway down the path. "First time here?" I asked. She nodded. "We couldn't find anywhere that felt kind." I smiled softly. "Then you found the right place." When they entered the lobby, her father stopped, looking around at the warm light, the photos on the wall, the sound of a piano playing faintly in the distance. "It feels like home," he whispered. I felt tears prick my eyes. That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked the halls alone, the way I used to when I was still a stranger here. Only now, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like a guardian. The moonlight poured through the windows, silver and soft. It touched the photographs, the flowers, the polished floorboards, all the pieces of a story that refused to die. I paused by Adeline's chair, resting my hand on the armrest. "We did it," I whispered. And for a moment, in the quiet hum of the night, I could almost hear her voice. Amused, teasing, proud. "Of course we did, dear. You just had to believe you could." It's been years since I walked into this place with nothing but a suitcase and a memory of loss. I came here thinking it was just a job, just a way to survive. But Evergreen gave me more than work. It gave me purpose. It gave me proof that even the smallest act of care can change the course of a life. Even the life of someone who thought she was beyond saving. Now, every time I open the front doors in the morning, I feel her with me. In the sunlight that spills across the floor, in the laughter from the dining room, in the soft footsteps of the living, she's here. In every wall, every flower, every heartbeat of this place. And I finally understand what she meant when she said, "People with nothing are the only ones who know what everything is worth." They said I walked into the nursing home with nothing. But what they didn't know was that I would leave it with everything that mattered. Not the money, not the building, but the love that built it, and the woman who taught me how to build again. End of story.